Hi all, in today's tutorial we're going to look at the element of art tone. We're going to create a monochromatic silhouette artwork. We're going to be inspired by Matthew Werre's artwork. Here's an example of his work. Alright guys, before we get started I want to look at aerial perspective and the picture plane. So a picture plane refers to objects and where they are placed within the image. So for example, this wolf is very far away from us within this image, and that is referred to as the background. As you move forward, things that sit in the middle of the image are referred to as being in the middle ground. And those things that are closest to us are referred to as being in the foreground. Okay, so there are our three picture planes. Now, to create the illusion of aerial or atmospheric perspective, objects that are really far away from us within the picture plane appear very light and have little detail. As those things come forward, they are darker and have more detailed, until they are closest to you, and then they are very dark and have lots of detail. So we're going to have to keep these things in mind as we create our artwork. Okay, to get started, I'm going to click on this little icon here of an eye, just to make that layer invisible. To import an image, you need to use the Import tool. It'll open up your photo library, and I'm going to click my first image. While we're still in this preview image, I can use two fingers to enlarge my image and place it where I want. Okay, I'm going to leave it here for now because I only want to use one mountain at the moment, and I click done to finish off. You will notice that as soon as you bring in an image, a new layer will appear in your image in your layer tab over here. Now, like I said, I only want to use one mountain at the moment, so I'm going to use this mountain down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my marquee tool, which is the dotted square. For this task, I'm going to use the wand tool. Now, when you click on the wand tool, you'll notice that there is a tolerance bar. The lower down on your bar, your tolerance, when you click on the select, or when you click on your object, you'll notice that not all of it is selected. There's parts where it's not all black, it's slightly grey. And so if it's on low tolerance, it'll only pick up the colours that are very close to the colour you have selected. Now, if I turn my tolerance up and I now click on that black mountain, you'll notice that I've now told the computer that I want it to pick up all the colours that are similar to the colour I have just chosen. So it's now selected any of those grey patches. Now, as you'll notice, now I've got this marching ant around my mountain to indicate that this is now selected. What I want to do now is I want to click on a new layer. So I'm going to click the press button to create a new layer. I'm going to use my bucket tool. Now the color I want for my mountain, because it's very far away from me, I want a light gray. So up here on my puck tool, and if this is not on your screen, you can access it by clicking on this little tool here that opens up your lagoon, and click on this button here, which is the double puck. Here you can quickly change your brush tool, but for this task I want to change my color. So I'm going to choose a light gray, and you'll notice it now changes to a light gray. And on that new layer, I'm going to bucket in that space there, so it's now light gray. I'm going to deselect my bucket tool, and I'm going to deselect my selection. So I click back on the marquee tool, and I click on the last icon, which has the X. So that is now no longer selected. So I'm going to eyeball and make invisible my original image that I pulled in, so that only the mountain that I've colored in is currently looking at. I'm going to move this mountain to the top, so I'm going to use my move tool, which is these four arrows here. I'm going to transform it. I'm going to take the mountain to the top of my page, and I'm going to make sure that my mountain goes off either end. Once I'm happy where it's placed, I'm going to press done, so I go back to my main screen. So you will now see that I have white space below my mountain. I want to fill that space with the same light gray. So I go back to my bucket tool and I fill in the space below my mountain. Okay, and that is our first mountain finished. I'm going to go through that same process again, but because my image has more than one mountain, I'm going to simply drag that layer above the previous one and click on the eyeball to bring the image back into view. This time I'm going to use this mountain here. So I'm going to select my marquee tool. I'm going to make sure I've got my wand selected. I'm going to click on the mountain that I want to do a fill of. I'm going to eyeball that layer so it's invisible. I'm going to press the plus button to create a new layer to put my color on. I'm going to go to my double puck, and I'm going to choose a slightly darker gray than my previous one. I'm going to use my bucket tool, and I'm going to fill in that space. I'm going to deselect the bucket tool. I'm going to go back to the marquee and I'm going to deselect that selection. I now want to enlarge this and move it up the top. So I'm going to use my move or my transform tool. I'm going to stretch it, but I don't want the mountain to get too large because it's going to be, I want it to keep it a little bit smaller. So instead of stretching the whole image, I'm going to take it off to one edge, and then I'm going to choose this tool, which is the Distort tool. It brings up these little dots, and from those dots you can stretch your image. So I'm just going to stretch it so it goes off the other side. I want to keep it rather close to the top of the other mountain so I have room down here to add my other layers. Once I'm happy with that, I simply press done. I now want to fill in the space below this mountain with the same color. So I choose my fill tool again and I fill in that space below. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring in a new image. The image I'm going to bring in now is a castle. I would recommend to do this task that you're bringing in a recognizable building or monument of some sort that you can place off to the side. Now, because I am moving forward, my castle is going to be slightly bigger than I would normally assume, but it is in the distance. It's not close to me, so it is still going to be in that smaller range as well. I'm going to place it roughly where I like. Now, please be aware that if you place your monument or building or anything off to the side here, once I press done, anything that's over here will be cut away. So if you go then to move it after you've placed it, anything that was over here will no longer be there. So make sure that you place it so that that part is still noticeable. Press done. I'm going to go through the same thing again. I'm going to collect my selection tool or my marquee. I'm going to use my magic wand. I'm going to click on the black part of my mountain, on my castle. I'm going to eyeball that layer so it's no longer visible for us to see. I'm going to click on the plus button to create a new layer. I'm going to grab my bucket tool. I'm going to choose a slightly darker grey than my previous one. I'm going to bucket fill it in, deselect the bucket, deselect your selection so there's no longer any marching animals. Now, I cannot bucket fill in this space below my castle because there's no edge. It'll simply fill up the entire space. So what I need to do before I fill in below this is I need to choose one of my pens, and I simply want to draw in a rough line that might indicate the ground at that distance. I can then grab my bucket tool and bucket fill below for that layer to be finished. Now, for this aesthetic, I'm going to add a couple of little dragons flying in the distance. Having some small birds or flying creatures at a back layer really help with creating some depth and some interesting things to your artwork. So I'm going to place my dragon in here. He is reasonably sized for this castle. I could make him slightly smaller or bigger, but I want to keep some of those finer details, so I'm going to leave him a little bit larger. Placing him in an interesting place, I'm going to select my magic wand. I'm going to click on the black area. I want to go on the same layer that I've previously just done because they're going to be the same color. So I don't need to create a new layer. I'm just going to choose the same one, same color. I'm going to eyeball that dragon and I'm going to bucket fill in the space of the dragon. Deselect the bucket, deselect the dragon tool. Now, I'm going to add a couple of other dragons in here. So I'm going to speed through that and I'm just going to fast forward the video. Okay, I have in 3 little dragons now. Now I'm going to move on to the next layer. The next layer I recommend that you put in is a tree layer. So here is my reference image. I'm going to make it slightly bigger in proportion to my castle because it is closer to me in my view. I don't want to enlarge my trees too big, so I'm going to use the Distort tool again. I'm going to drag that tree line from one side to the other. If you feel that these are too large sideways, you could always do one, bring in a second image. So I can now duplicate this and then move that tree line over here, overlap them slightly where they make sense, and then merge those two to create one layer. So my tree line goes all the way across. Now, if you're trying to find a tree line like this on the internet, I simply typed in tree line silhouette to get a series of trees. So because there's all these little white spots, if I continue to use my magic wand and click on the black area, those little white spots will remain. I'm going to eyeball that layer so I don't see it, add in a new layer, select my bucket tool, select a slightly darker grey than previous, bucket fill in that tree line, deselect the bucket, deselect the selection, choose the bucket tool again, and bucket fill below. Now, if I feel that my tree line is too high and I want to move it down, I can do so by using the transform or the move tool, and I can just move that layer down a little bit. But I will like it just to overlay that mountain in the background. Okay. Now, you could bring in another tree line and do the same thing again, but a cheat option is if I click on my layer and open up my extra layer options, I can click on the duplicate tool, so I now have 2 of those layers. If I choose a slightly darker grey than our previous layer and bucket fill that section in, and then use my transform or move tool and move that down, I now have 2 layers of that same tree line. Now, it does mirror the layer behind. So to make it look like we're not just duplicated it, we can use this tool and we can flip that image so it's now going in the opposite direction. It gives the illusion that I've got 2 different silhouette tree lines, but I've only duplicated it. I've not had to go through the whole process again. Click done. All right, to finish off our silhouette, I recommend that you add in another layer of mountains. No, actually, I recommend that we just do a silhouette of our feature animal, which is right at the front. Now, I don't want to put it here because my castle's on this side, but I do want my animal looking inwards on the image, like it's looking in on the page. So I'm going to flip it so it looks in here with the mountain in the background. This horse is closest to me, or this unicorn is closest to me, so it's going to be very large in proportion to everything else. And I'm going to press done. I'm going to select my horse silhouette first. All right, once you have your horse selected, I'm going to eyeball that layer so I don't see it. I'm going to plus button for a new layer. I'm going to bucket tool using a darker color. I'm going to fill in my horse. Since this is my last layer, I'm going to drop to my black. I'm going to turn my horse black. Deselect the bucket and deselect the selection. Okay. To finish off our artwork, we want to bring in one more silhouette, which is going to be a grass silhouette. So this will finish off putting our horse or our animal feature on a ground at the start. So what I'm going to do is, I don't want our grass to be too big, so I'm going to have to duplicate this image a number of times. So I place it where I want it to start off with, and I click done. Go back to my layer. I'm going to duplicate, so I have multiple. I'm going to transform or move that layer across so that it sits next to the previous layer. Now, you can always flip if you want your images to look different, so they don't look like they're all doubled up. Okay, so once you have your grass line in, you can again use your select tool with your magic wand. Make sure your tolerance is turned up high so it will select as much of that grass as possible. You can notice here that some of the lighter grey areas aren't being picked up. I can turn up my tolerance and collect more. I can also click on this button here and choose plus. What that means is that I've got a selection already, and I click on the plus button. I can continue to select areas and it will simply add it to what I already have selected without deselecting anything. So I'm going to go ahead and select a few more areas. Okay, once you have the grass area that you want to select, you can eyeball your grass layer image. Plus button for a new layer. And then bucket fill in your grass area. Deselect the bucket, deselect the selection tool, and you have your grass layer in. Now, my animal doesn't quite sit there, so I'm going to move my grass layer up to a more appropriate level. Make sure it goes off either side. And then I can use my bucket tool to fill in the area below so my horse looks like it is on a grass layer. Now from here you can add more layers, so I think a second layer of grass behind this layer would look good. So I'm going to duplicate that layer so I have 2 copies of it. I'm going to bucket fill it. Because I'm moving it back in the layer, I'm going to go slightly lighter than the first layer. I'm going to transform or move, so I'm going to move that back a little bit. It is sitting in front of my black layer, so I need to move that layer behind my previous layer. It is mirroring, so I'm going to flip so they look like they go in different directions. And I need to drag that below my horse layer as well because it's sitting in front of my horse. And there you have it. That is a simple formula for how to create a monochromatic landscape silhouette. Enjoy.